Have you ever experienced overwhelm while making an important decision? Or do you ever wish that you could be more resilient and less reactive when you're stressed? This week's episode of Free Your Inner Guru is a powerful conversation with one of the most heartwarming people I know, Barb Fletcher. Barb is a life coach and a heart math specialist who loves to help you make sense of your emotions in times of change. I know you'll find great value in listening to what she has to share about building healthy emotional resilience by connecting to the power and wisdom of your heart. Welcome to Free Your Inner Guru. I'm your host, Laura Tucker. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us here today. Today I have a special guest, Barb Fletcher. Barb is a breakthrough coach who helps women in transition, and at the core of her work is helping her clients develop resiliency. I initially contacted Barb to have this conversation about one of my big values, alignment. And if there's one thing that I know about alignment is that when we're out of alignment with our core values, we experience a state that I call dissonance. I knew, if nothing else, from my previous conversations with Barb, that helping people find connection where they don't experience dissonance with their emotions and within their body is a big part of her work. So I'm really excited to have you here today, Barb. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Well, thanks so much, Laura. I'm so pleased to be here to join you in this wonderful conversation.
So Barb, let's start off with a little bit of your story. You haven't always been a breakthrough coach. What brought you to this work, and what was it about your life that aligned this up for you?
I guess when I think back, it probably starts, I followed a path that was pretty normal. I was, went to university, graduated, got married, and then some things unfolded differently than I planned. I had a son before I was 30, and he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 2, which way back then, 30 years ago, was quite different than it is today. And so began to experience stress. Then by the time he was 10 years old, I was a single parent, so a new kind of stress. And so just a series of life experiences, which led me on a path that, I just knew that I needed to find a way to be what I called more resilient, or the ability to take a bounce after a stress. And so it really came to a head when my husband had stage 4 kidney cancer. And he'd been off for a period of time before that, and he actually recovered. But, it was just, there were so many things happening to us all at once that I knew that I needed to find a way to be present and have that inner strength. So I looked at tools to build up my resiliency, and came across a number, and one that we'll talk about this afternoon is called heart math, which is an awareness of our emotions, and I use breath to build resiliency.
So let's talk a little bit about resiliency, because I think it's a word that can be surprisingly ambiguous. Mm-hmm. In fact, a lot of the time in traditional kind of old school self-help talk, being resilient and as something that I equate with powering through is sometimes postured or positioned as a badge of honor. Like we always have to be striving and powering through, whether it's our fear, our emotion, and really amping up our energy to get through obstacles. And in my mind, the last thing that we want to create for ourselves is a life that requires constant having to be, tough, strong, power through. And goodness knows I've done it to the nth degree. So how does this type of resilience or resiliency differ from the type of resilience that we might associate more with these more powerful, strong, traditional
So I've had some experiences powering through as well. I developed TMJ and so went through all the process related to TMJ and actually worked my way through 3 biplanes before I found resilience. And so powering through is certainly not the answer. So I see resilience as something softer. And I think when we think about resilience, we think about perhaps sometimes more the physical aspects of it. What we know is if we don't look at the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, the physical as one whole unit, then we're not in alignment. It's like those people who we see who are physically, they eat the right things, they don't smoke, they don't do any of those things, yet they develop some dis-ease in their body. And people say, well, how could that be? Really what it is, it's that lack of awareness of all the other aspects of who we are as a human being.
So using your example that you gave a few moments ago of TMJ, if I recall, it's temporomandibular joint.
Exactly.
Your jaw.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So maybe for someone who isn't familiar with that acronym, I certainly am. Tell us what TMJ is and how that showed up for you as a symptom that you needed to address this on an emotional, spiritual level, not just the physical.
How it presented physically was excruciating pain in the jaw joint where the upper and lower jaw meet, and it resulted in headaches and just huge amounts of pain. And so I did all of the physical type kinds of things. I did physio and I did exercises and I did all of those things. But it wasn't until I actually dealt with some of the emotions that were attached to it that I really was able to release what was holding me back. And so in this situation, it was a period of time where I didn't have a voice and I wasn't speaking up for myself. And so, and I had worked with one person who just, she had the key to unlock what was happening. And now I find myself again in places, when I lack a little bit of awareness and I just over the past week, I experienced a day where I started to get that feeling again in my jaw. And I had to sit with that and say, okay, so really what is going on here? What's, because our first response is to say, well, I guess I should take an Advil. I've got a headache. And that really isn't where the answers lie. For me, the answers lied in taking time to get quiet and feeling my way into what was going on. And again, it was a situation where I was carrying tension in my jaw because I wasn't speaking up. I wasn't using my voice.
So this is how a pattern in your body can inform you about a pattern in your life.
Absolutely. And our biggest challenge is to be prepared to slow down long enough to sit with whatever that emotion is and feel into it to understand what it actually has to tell us. And it's messy. It's not like going to the doctor and saying, I have a pain in my head. And so therefore, and he says, okay, so here's a prescription for you. This is messier. It takes some time. And, it often requires us to look in the mirror, and we're much more comfortable in looking outwards than looking inward.
Oh, I can hear that. You're making me remember my own situation where my jaw was clamped shut. Mm-hmm. And it takes me back to, this would be 25 years ago when I was a young student learning to be a teacher. And I was, one thing about teaching, though, I'll tell you, when you're teaching young kids, it is an exercise in building your immune system because you get sick a lot at first. And I came down with tonsillitis. But it was such a stressful and demanding year in my life. I had left a long-term relationship, had moved back home for support, was in a very demanding primary junior teaching program, and then came down with this horrible, horrible case of tonsillitis. They get me into the hospital, and at the time I assumed because of the physical pain that I was in, the infection just wasn't going away. And I was clamping down on my jaw where they couldn't feed me in the hospital and they couldn't get my mouth open. Literally had to force a piece of gum in there for me to work it through. And I recall, like at the time, 25 years old or so, maybe close to 30, but I'm a very different 50-year-old than I was 25 or 30-year-old. Mm-hmm. And didn't really, once I got better, just soldiered on, but ended up leaving teaching a few years later when it wasn't the right environment for me.
Well, it took me the three plastic devices that I actually bit through before I got to a place where I understood that I needed to actually go inside. So sounds like you probably learned the lesson a little more quickly than I did.
Oh, maybe. Maybe. So let's go back then into if you were to work with someone, mm-hmm. and take me through, if you will, either a description or an example of the process that you use. You mentioned heart math earlier. I've heard of heart math before, mm-hmm. But I don't know too much about it.
As we've spoken about, we understand the physical body and how to work with physical ailments, whether we go through the medical system. So we understand that, but we don't spend a whole lot of time looking at the emotional side and what relationship it could have with what's actually going on in our body. If you think about being a child, how many times were you told as a child not to feel a particular way or to stop reacting? Don't cry, be tough. And so our emotions, we're told to compartmentalize them to make them small as opposed to actually feeling things. And this is really evident because if you think about a child in a grocery store and you're standing at the counter and they decide they want a chocolate bar and the mother says no, they just lose it. The mother says yes, and they snap out of it just like that. So they have a high heart rate variance. We as adults aren't able to move that quickly. We've shortened that distance between, and we do that over our life. So if you think about emotions that you particularly have, what if you hold a grudge? Then you're hanging on to that emotion. You're not able to release it. Children don't hang on to things the same way. They're sad and then they're happy. And we can't make that shift nearly as quickly. So what I do is help people understand where they're spending their day as it relates to emotions, whether they're spending them in a period of frustration and fear. Maybe they're spending it in, a good portion of the day in depression or lethargy. Perhaps they're spending their time in relaxation, peacefulness, or maybe they're actually they're spending their time in a place of excitement, anticipation, passion. It is that last bit, the excitement and passion, that actually is the time when we actually build resilience.
If I'm understanding you, when you use the child as the example of a little being that can pull themselves out of their state very quickly, mm-hmm. in this case, because they're getting what they want, the pain of their situation has been removed. It's no longer a concern or a threat. Mm-hmm. And they bounce right back up. I think you said bounce ability earlier. Are you saying that over the course of our lifetime, we get trained or groomed out of our ability to do that?
Absolutely. Society is less comfortable with us reacting emotionally. Particularly if you think about women in leadership positions, we're encouraged not to feel, encouraged not to demonstrate emotion. And men who do the same are disdained. They're not looked upon favorably. And so we're taught to push it all down, push those emotions deep inside. We never come to an understanding of how to work with those emotions, how to release those ones that are no longer serving us.
I hear that. I feel that on a very visceral level.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone's listening right now and they're wondering, okay, I totally get what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Can you offer something practical that illustrates a little bit the work that you do with people? What can a person do when they're in this perturbed state?
I think the most useful aspect of the perturbed state is the awareness.
So get the lesson.
Understand that you're perturbed.
Oh, okay. Even before all of that. Yeah.
For all of that, because we are not, we're emotional beings, but I wouldn't suggest we're emotionally aware beings. We bounce around, and when you create that awareness as to an emotion, then until you've created that awareness, you don't have a choice. Up until that point, you're just aimlessly moving about.
You're in it.
You're in it. Once you understand a particular feeling that you have, then you've got a choice. And you've got a choice to either stay with that or understand what might actually be happening and what you can do about that. The work that I do is really, it has 3 pillars. The first pillar is just that emotional awareness, understanding when you're in these particular areas. Then I do a second step that looks at using the emotional freedom technique, or sometimes referred to as tapping, which allows us to release particular emotions that we could have been carrying over a lifetime. And then the third step is, how do we build resilience once we've done that? And I help people build resilience by using their heart and using their breath. And they need to practice 5 minutes a couple of times a day, and they'll actually be astounded at how much easier it is for them to take the bounce when stress arrives. And the tool itself, and we can do that, the tool itself actually can be done while you're standing in line at the grocery store, while you're driving the car. And so that's what's really important about this, because we know that relaxation, that peacefulness, whether it's sitting on a yoga mat or sitting quietly doing meditation, those are a couple of activities that don't afford themselves to life in the situation when it's intense. So what we need to be able to do is, if we're in a stressful meeting, if we're having an argument, if we're able to create enough conscious awareness to do this technique, then in fact you'll find that life is much easier. So the first thing I ask people to do is to think about an object, a place, a thing, could be a pet, could be a person, that whenever they feel into that, they just feel an overwhelming sense of love. So the reason we don't usually go with people is that, everybody says, well, I think I'll choose my child. But every day isn't one where we automatically think, oh, isn't that great? I'm full of love, because if they've just, had an unpleasant experience with you, you might not be so.
It may not be as clean as what you're saying.
That's right.
Yeah. So if your kid is pissing you off right now, don't piss your kid.
I was trying to be more tactful, but it has happened. So you may want to, I enjoy the beach. I enjoy water. I have a favorite crystal that I often hold. And so that's my choice. So I ask people to choose that and be thoughtful about that, because the cleaner that is, the easier it is for you to get there.
Perfect. Okay.
So the second step I want you to do is just focus on your heart. So you don't have to do anything else. You can keep your eyes open. You're driving. It's all good. And then I want you to envision that the breath is coming in and out of your heart area. So heart focus and then heart breath. So you're going to breathe a little bit deeper and a little bit slower than what you would normally do. If you're unsure of equal in and equal out, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the in-breath and an equal amount on the out-breath. So just breathe in. And exhale through the heart. And on the next out breath, I want you to breathe out that heart appreciation, that object or place or thing that you felt. So and we'll do that 3 or 4 more times. So one of the things that people often say when they're doing this is they feel more energy in their body when they do that. And you also can see them visually allow their shoulders to drop, the tension to perhaps go out of their face.
I felt a softening in my front, which I've become aware more recently that I'm holding tension right in front of my heart. So that is, like a protective shell. And I just actually read a book yesterday, Braving the Wilderness by Brene Brown. And one of the things that she says in this brilliant book is about having a strong back, like a strong spine, and a soft front, so that we're not always protecting ourselves from other people. It seems to me that having a technique that literally softens your energy wherever you're holding it is a way to build that, to develop that like a skill.
It's interesting because all of this work that around what the tool, which is called HeartMath, is based on more than 30 years of research and is actually quietly supported by a number of leaders that we're probably all following, whether it's Jack Canfield, he talks about it, could be Christiane Northrup, who refers to it in her books. Greg Braden is a big supporter. So I think, and Tony Robbins, if you take it to another extreme. So I think, it's a technique that underlies a lot of what the spiritual leaders are doing. And it's just, I think you're right, Laura. I think it's softening that heart area and allowing us to be present and open to what might be coming in.
And what might be the message in the distress or stress.
For sure.
I know in a lot of my work, when I'm working one-to-one with a client, we look at one of the goals is always to establish who the person really is, who they're meant to be. Mm-hmm. And often when they come in, there's definitely dissonance between where they want to go and how they perceive they need to get there and who they really are. And so we unwind some of that, even just through conversation, but also learning how to pay attention to things like frustration, bitterness, anger as signposts that they are not in their true self. This is not what's authentic for them. How do you relate to that in your that statement, in your take on things and the value of this work that you do?
So one of the examples is there's a process that looks at mapping out who their true self is. So one of the exercises I have people do is, we'll just sit and map out, with a drawing as to what's important. And then we'll spend 10 minutes getting in coherence and we'll redo it. And it's absolutely stunning, the difference, because we're moving it from a thinking mind to a feeling. And the outcome is what people have interpreted as what mattered often is never even, it's not even close. So in particular, I'll use an example of a young woman that is now living in Yellowknife, and she's confused about the decision to go or whether to stay. And so she had been someone who'd worked with me in the past. And so she came over, we did the technique, we looked at what the things that were important, did some planning, and then she got in coherence, and I held the energy with her, and she redid the exercise, and she found out that some of the things that she thought were important didn't make the list.
And that's from you're getting out of your head into your heart, into your body for that awareness. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is. And what HeartMath really does is looks at the heart intelligence, because the heart has so much more understanding than the brain. So if you think about a situation where intellectually you figured out that you were stressed, then our heart has felt that thousands of times more quickly than our brain did. Our brain can't keep up.
So, and you mean literally our organ,
exactly.
The heart, not the heart center, not the heart chakra, not I'm coming from my heart, I'm a heart-based entrepreneur heart. You're talking about the actual heart tissue.
Exactly. And the reason, and we have visual proof of this, because of the work that we do with HeartMath, there's actually a biofeedback tool that people can use. They put a little clip on their ear, and it connects either to your computer or a phone. And it looks at the heart rate variance, the difference between the low and the high heart rate. And so what you'll see is people who think with their head that everything's going well could be completely off the rails. Or what you can do is someone who's in coherence will be going along in a nice, even manner. And you can say to them, now I want you to think about a time which was really troubling to you. And it's like that. And it shows up as a visual in front of them by this irregular, erratic heartbeat. And we aren't able, so they wouldn't have known in their mind that was going on. They were just feeling their way into it. And it's really quite stunning.
Wow, that's remarkable. Because I'm thinking about, when, let's say I'm out running or training to run, and I'm very, very aware of what my heart is doing then, because I'm placing physical demand on it. Mm. But it's not the same, say, sitting at your desk, working on, whatever, where our mind is elsewhere and we're not as present to our bodies as when we're in motion.
It's those unconscious thoughts that are carrying on in the background, the sabotage, the beliefs, the stuff that's under the surface. So we think all is right with the world, but there's another story being told, and this gets visible through this biofeedback device, which, for the person who has, an analytical mind, or a little bit like me who loves gadgets, they'll, it's a valuable visual presentation for them to say, okay, now I guess there is more at play here than what I thought.
Right, because it's logical and measurable.
It is measurable, yeah.
So I was just thinking about, let's relate this or try to relate this to a scenario that I'm seeing play out very, very often over the course of the last year, which is people are stressed by world affairs. People are struggling with the news, with their social media feeds. They're being inundated constantly with, and it doesn't matter what political ideology, but we're being constantly bombarded with stimuli that are knocking people out of their happy place, as a very overly simplified way to describe it. What do you see, and how can this help, beyond the obvious counseling people to take it easy and back off the drug, so to speak? How does this help?
As empaths, and that's somebody who feels into these particular situations. It's a challenging time if we don't learn how to manage it. If we feel into absolutely every situation, I think we'll be a nervous wreck. We'll be looking for what the next thing is to happen. So I think, what is within our control is our interpretation and how we manage our own emotions and internal dialogue. And so, for me, it's practicing heart math, every day. So if we're a runner, we don't plan to run a marathon next week. We train. And so what if we wanted to do, we wanted to be good at managing our emotions and our feelings? Perhaps we need to spend a little bit of time training the same way. And so, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night, and you will begin to build that resilience, and you begin to interpret the situations a little bit more detached, and you don't necessarily feel into them the same way. I mean, you can, the troubles that have, the recent ones, the hurricanes, there's no question it would be unlikely that we couldn't feel into that. It's how long we hang on to it.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because you and I were at an event together over that weekend when Hurricane Irma was coming ashore in Florida, and there were a number of people in the room with us who have homes in that area. And it was, now that we're both out as empaths, it was very difficult to not take on that fear and concern and have it pull away from the central intention of the day, which is an exercise in presence, really.
Yeah, and when we were there, we were told that presence, the other person doesn't get to decide when.
I was just going through my notes for a podcast that will air before this one about Simon Sinek's talk about the yoga teacher who was, I guess, at a meeting with him and was ever scrolling through her feed and listening only when she was listening, but she was describing herself as someone who was highly present. And he emphatically was talking about, you don't get to say when you're present. That's something that other people say about you. Mm-hmm. That how you show up in every moment is what counts, not just when you're on. So that's a really nice coming together of those two very different talks and lines of thinking. But to a degree, I think a lot of this is about being present for yourself, let alone being present for other people.
Well, and certainly if you were to successfully have a heart math practice, you cannot be distracted and build that resilience. You have to be present. And so, and it's not the same as meditation, because what we're doing is we're looking at that quadrant or that area where you're in high excitement, high energy, and the heart rate is up. And so it's different than relaxation and meditation for that. And the conversation around presence was very powerful for me, because how many times have we said to somebody, you're not paying attention to me? And the person will say, oh, well, yes, of course. But if we don't feel heard, then we're not.
And that, in many cases, is enough to take someone into a state of high dissonance.
Yeah,
not feeling seen, not feeling heard.
Frustration.
Yeah. Well, it occurs to me that there's a lot of really great work to be done in this area, Barb, especially since, and part of the reason I love this conversation so much is it makes me think about how people who want to move forward and step into positions of leadership need to support themselves in this way so that they can be present for the person to their left and the person to their right, and be able to be at their best. And if it's a leader who has chosen quiet leadership, who is, so if you're like me, where you realize, oh my goodness, I can no longer be quiet and must have a voice, that's a highly stressful situation, at least at first, maybe always. But this is a way to help self-regulate so that you can, and self-care, so that you can then be compassionate and show up as the best leader possible.
I don't think, unless we were to, disconnect completely, that we're ever going to find a time where we're stress-free. I think, even people who practice and incorporate all the things that are helpful in our lives, we're still going to encounter stress. So it's really about the bounce. I still wake up in the night from time to time, and my go-to response when I wake up is to get in coherence, which is the technique that I just shared with you, because I know that will take me away from that place of anxiousness, anxiety, where the thoughts are carrying me away, to that place where back down to earth and back to some level of resilience. So I think we're always going to need these tools. And I think, it's when we spend the time practicing with these tools, I think we are the same as we would getting ready for a marathon. I think we're well served by that.
I love that. And it really is a discipline in the best sense of the word, and a practice that can be used for life. Because as you said, stress ain't going away.
It's not. And
it'll be different next year as this year. It'll be different tomorrow as from 5 minutes from now. So the more tools, the better.
And once you've got these tools, then your adaptation and your interpretation becomes easier.
And that's what resiliency is.
It absolutely is.
Well, thank you. I feel like we've really come to a nice place in this conversation for me to ask you, if someone's listening today, Barb, and they want to find you and get in touch with you, where can you be found?
So my website is barb-fletcher.com. And I'm happy to have a conversation. Pop on there and just send me a note. And I am going to share about an event that we have coming up in October.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me here today on Free Your Inner Guru, Barb. It's been a pleasure. If you have resonated with this conversation and want to connect with Barb, you can visit her website at barb-fletcher.com, where she offers a 30-minute breakthrough call. You can also find her on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're local to Barb in Fredericton, New Brunswick, she has an upcoming event on October 19th called the Power of Three Summit. You can find out more and purchase tickets at thepowerofthreesummit.com. You can find all of those links in the show notes or by going directly to freeyourinnerguru.com. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I know you have a lot of choice where you receive your inspiration and information. If these ideas and stories resonate with you, I would be so grateful if you would take a few extra seconds for two quick things. One, if there's an idea or moment in the story or conversation that you feel would make a difference in someone else's life, take a quick moment to share on whatever app or website you're listening on. And two, subscribe so that you can become part of the ongoing conversation. Big conversations become the catalyst for meaningful change. I'm Laura Tucker, signing off for Free Your Inner Guru.